Good evening. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I invite you to join us. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call.
Gehrig?
Here.
Pepcorn?
Here.
Preston? Here. Strand?
Here.
Mahoney?
Here. Planning. Building permit values totals in 2021 were more than $763 million compared to more than $720 million in 2020. Of note, there are 879 permits issued in 2021 for residential remodeling projects totaling more than $17 million and 421 permits issued for commercial remodeling totaling more than $164 million. There are also 379 permits issued for new homes, totaling almost $116 million. And I think that number is higher than Horace, so just so you know. Inspections Department will no longer be storing commercial plans with record keepers. If the public would like to retain commercial plans that may be stored with record keepers, contact the inspector's office and request the documents. A spreadsheet with the addresses of the stored plans will be made available under the inspections link of City of Fargo website, along with contact information to request the documents. The library, as usual, is busy. The library's online winter readathon program for readers of all ages runs through March 6, and readers are invited to read to earn prizes. This year's theme is Get Smitten with Reading. Baby Rhyme Time for infants and their caregivers continues this month and is scheduled for January 18th at the main library and January 20th at the Carlson Library. The library's winter storytime series of the weekly storytime sessions for kids 2 through 6 starts January 24th. This evening, we are officially opening the application process for the Fargo Police Advisory and Oversight Board. This new opportunity to be involved and impactful to city operations is profound, and I sincerely hope we see a large and diverse applicant pool. The chief has produced a video to recruit residents to this important board. We will watch it now.
Hello Fargo, Chief Dave Zabalski here. I'm excited this evening to inform you that applications are now online on the city website for you interested community members to apply for the first ever Fargo Police Advisory and Oversight Board. This first ever board will create a dialogue between community representatives and the department. It will help improve relationships, assist with diverse recruitment, and provide community perspective on policy and programs that are of interest to the community. Things like body-worn cameras and things of that nature that have a strong community level of interest. There are a number of qualifications to join this board, which would consist ultimately of 7 members. In the online packet, please review carefully the qualifications to make sure that before you submit your application, you've met them. A couple of key components: you must be 21 years of age and a City of Fargo resident. In addition, the board members will be required to commit not only to monthly meetings, but also to the initial training of up to 40 hours. This will be very similar to a Citizens Academy experience, but we feel it's important that you understand many of the nuances that are involved in law enforcement work before you actually become involved in some of the policy discussions and review of personnel investigations or use of force. So I'm really excited to see this board take its next step forward. We will have the application process will be open until we have sufficient applicants to fill the board, which will ultimately be appointed by the commission. And we are anticipating that the board would first be seated and meet in April. So if you are interested and committed to improving police community relations, you have a strong interest in your community, please consider applying for this. We are looking for diverse candidates across the city, race, gender, but also age, experience, business owners, people who will be representative of our entire community, work collaboratively with our police department as we take the next steps forward into improving relations and transparency, all in service to our great Fargo community. So again, this is a pretty exciting moment. I encourage you to look this over, and if interested, apply.
Now, if the commissioners have any questions, I have Travis and Christie here to talk or visit, or if you have any questions, or if we're okay to go ahead with that. Any questions of the commissioners? Very good. Thank you. The other thing you need to know about, we have to acknowledge the 9-time national champion Bison. And for the next 9 days, we will have all the lights in the exterior and interior of City Commission in the colors of green and gold. And every now and then on a cold day, we'll have Commissioner Pipcorn outstand taking autographs. So, is there a motion to approve the order of the agenda?
I so move. Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Is there a motion to approve the minutes of December 27th, 21st regular meeting? Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Motion carried. Is there a motion to approve consent agenda items 1 through 11?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Roll call vote, please.
Preston?
Aye.
Gehrig?
Yes.
Pipcorn?
Aye.
Strand?
Yes.
Mahoney?
Aye. Resident comment period. I have 2 people on the list, Steve Schoens. If you come to the podium over here, Steve. And Christopher Cohn is next. Christopher, you know how to do this, so.
Thank you. Commissioners, thanks for allowing me a few minutes to speak. I come before you today just to share a few concerns regarding public safety, namely traffic as it relates to speeding, red light running, and DUIs. I'd like to share a few stats with you as taken from Fargo PD's annual reports. In 2012, there was 25,064 traffic violations that were reported. In 16, that dropped to 15,916. And in 2020, that dropped to 8,343. Obviously a COVID year, but still low. Again, in 2012, there was 1,017 DUIs reported. And that dropped in 2016 to 552, in 2020 to 298. And as of this year, year to date, in October, it was 262. Well, I don't know about you, but these numbers surprised me. And what kind of drove me to this point was I just saw a decreased presence of traffic control out there from our Fargo PD. They do a wonderful job, and I know that the number of calls that they go on have increased greatly. But it just makes me wonder, should we be taking a deeper look into this as a city as far as more patrol? Is there a less of a priority going on? Do we need to start doing some more things that we were doing before that we're not doing now? I also want to point out that the crime mapping tool has been removed from the Fargo PD's website for whatever reason. Just wondering if that's going to come back. That's been a wonderful tool for a lot of citizens. And I just want to say again, Fargo PD does a wonderful job, and this doesn't have anything to do with any officers, but I just want to make sure that I brought this up today to put it on your radar. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Christopher Cole?
One issue that I brought up, I'm Christopher Cohn, Fargo resident, and an issue that I brought up with one of the commissioners here has been the conflicts of interest issue with regards to employees. But specifically, I was thinking about conflicts with regard to the residents who are on our boards and commissions. And I attend some of the meetings, and I've noticed in one case a conflict of interest that I was concerned about. So we looked at the city policy on this, and I don't think it's adequate. I think it needs to be looked at and improved. And the previous city attorney, he showed us that the state law is inadequate. The state law just tries to make sure that people are there and vote. So it doesn't do anything to try to prevent people from voting when they actually have a conflict of interest. And also any kind of a policy has to address the appearance of conflict of interest, because that can be as damaging as actual conflicts of interest. Also, one thing that came up with the city attorney is that, he showed us a copy of one of his memos from 1999 on that issue, and he referred to another one of his memos from the same year, and I did request it, and he said he couldn't find it. And I'm wondering what records of his are going to go with him and are not going to be retained here at the city. The memo was to a city planning commission, and they didn't have a copy either. So I'm wondering if we need a city archivist or something similar so that residents can be able to find records when they need them in the future. And it's not dependent on just whoever is city attorney of the moment and so forth. And then finally, with regard to the public comments that you talked about at the last meeting, I like the idea that Commissioner Strand brought up about extending the comments from 2.5 minutes to longer if there's less people who want to talk. And it doesn't mean someone should be able to talk 30 minutes if they're the only one signed up, but what about like a maximum of 5 minutes? Because it's very hard to say what you want to say in 2.5 minutes. Thanks.
It's not quite 5:15. Desi, are you on for the COVID-19 update?
I am. Good
Okay.
evening, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. So we are starting to see the impacts of Omicron variant in our area with increases in cases and positivity. Cass County currently has 1,172 active cases with 3,800 in the state. Nearly 50% of our active cases are in the 20 to 39-year-old age range. Our 7-day positivity rate is over 23%. Hospitalizations are 122 statewide, which is down from the Delta surge. But since staff is being more impacted with the Omicron infection themselves, capacity for staffed beds remains an issue. Also, our flu numbers are increasing substantially, which is contributing to hospitalizations. Last week, there were 30 hospitalizations in the state from influenza. Death totals from COVID for Cass are 290 and just over 2,000 statewide. Omicron has now been identified in 70% of sequence PCRs at the state, but realistically is probably higher since there is a delay between testing and sequencing. This variant is highly contagious and spreads quickly through communities. Data is showing unvaccinated, fully vaccinated, and those with a history of infection or natural immunity are most likely to have more negative outcomes from Omicron. However, data from the UK does show even boosted individuals after 10 weeks may see waning immunity with protection from symptomatic disease, decreasing to around 55%, but still 89% effective against hospitalization. Treatment with the monoclonal antibodies is also limited in the fight against Omicron, with basically one that is still effective to use, causing supply issues further restricting availability. It's really difficult at this time to predict if cases of Omicron will remain mild overall, but the sheer potential volume of cases will naturally increase the incidence of severe outcomes for some, and in many areas across the nation that is involving children as well. Modeling for our area suggests Omicron to peak the end of January, but also predicts the next 3 weeks to be incredibly challenging for healthcare. So we will continue to monitor that situation closely. Our storefront testing site is quickly being inundated by high numbers of people. Today, we will probably top 4,000 to 5,000 people tested. Due to a likely shortage of antigen tests, we are no longer allowing people to receive a PCR and an antigen test. They will need to choose which format they want. We are the only free testing site in the county, so it's really proving challenging. When we first agreed to do testing, it was to cover gaps for travelers, but we have become the main testing site in the community, which is difficult with our limited staff numbers. We have contract help, some city employees have helped as well, and some staff through the State Department of Operations Center, but our staffing every day is an issue, so that is kind of an ongoing challenge. Masking continues to be a topic of great division nationwide and in our community. It's important to understand that masking is not a standalone strategy or a long-term solution in itself. Masking does have value as a layer of prevention when it's coupled with other strategies. At our physicians meeting last week, the infectious disease docs are saying due to the infectiousness of Omicron that cloth masks may provide little value and that a KN95 or N95 may provide more protection. Even with a higher quality mask, they need to be worn correctly and consistently every time in every public environment outside of your home to help protect from community spread. there is little epidemiological impact when masks are only worn in one setting, and our community overall has minimum to no usage. Our message that public health has put out on social media this past week to decrease your risk over the next surge period is to vaccinate now, whatever you're due for, being first dose, second dose, or booster, masking whenever you are in public spaces, avoiding gatherings, especially for the next month, testing as appropriate, staying home when you're sick, and follow isolation and quarantine guidance. All of these will require purposeful choices of all residents to make an effort to safeguard our health system and our community in the weeks ahead. I would be happy to answer any questions.
Commissioner Preston.
So Desi, are you saying that none of the other healthcare providers are doing major testing efforts?
So we are the only free site. So when you go to the State Health Department website, it lists Fargo. So we are today, for whatever reason, too, we're getting a ton of Moorhead people. So it's just really complicated. Sanford, I believe, requires a provider visit for a test. And so there's barriers to other places, and most people charge a fee. So I don't know, many of you have probably been to our storefront, but it's not big. And so we are really struggling with volume.
Commissioner Strand.
Thank you, Mayor. Desi, could you help me understand what our neighboring other regional jurisdictions are doing currently with mask requirements?
I think, well, in our state, at least, they are fairly non-existent. We do have our Fargo Public and Grand Forks Public Schools that have the required mandate in place until the 17th of January, and then they are going to a strongly recommending masking. Cass County, I believe, still has the employee requirement for masking. And, you know, maybe just a handful of businesses require their employees. Also, healthcare still has the masking component, but otherwise, really, there is not much to speak of.
Any other questions? Commissioner Strand.
So Desi, I know that you're, of course, in the lane of public health, but I'm guessing that it would be gratifying if the city of Fargo were to revisit a mask policy right now with the explosion of Omicron?
You know, I think the reality, Commissioner Strand, is do mandates work? Yes, but they only work if that is a consistent strategy throughout the community. So even the CDC guidance for school, you know, that really implies that when they're saying masks should be universally worn in schools, they're assuming that the community has a mask mandate and that everybody is masking in the community. And so unless you have like an all-in strategy for everybody all the time, everywhere, it's really probably not going to make an impact going forward. And I know, Commissioner Strand, you had wanted me to talk about the Grand Forks plan as well that they did. So the city of Grand Forks did purchase N95 masks to give to the community, and public health just has those at their building, and so people can come and take them. I believe they use their CARES funding for that. They give out 5 masks at a time, along with some general instructions, and just have community members that aren't able to afford masks or need help with that. They had a program in place to do that.
Commissioner Strand.
Mayor, I'm going to advance a motion. I move to reinstate the City of Fargo mask policies, however, this time utilizing N95 and KN95 masks, effective midnight tonight, and to then be revisited by the City Commission in 1 month at our February 7th meeting.
Is there a second?
I'll second that for purpose of discussion, just to hear a little more.
Discussion. Commissioner.
Mr. Chairman, I just find it amusing how hypocritical it is that nobody's wearing a mask up here. If it's such a effective tool and there's 5 people wearing them in this whole room. So to me, it's time to move on.
Mr. Chairman, if I could,
Question? No applause, please.
if I could
You can
ask,
only applaud for liberal things, not conservative things, correct, Mayor?
if I could ask a question, please? So Commissioner Strand, are you talking solely the City of Fargo employees? You're talking internal?
Mr. Strand.
I'm talking of City of Fargo buildings, facilities, and employees, and the public who come in and out of our buildings.
Mr. Chairman, if I
Commissioner Preston.
So what I'm hearing from Desi and what I hear from everyone else as well is that unless the whole community does this, it doesn't, there's very little, if any, value to doing that.
One concern I have about N95 masks, if they're not worn correctly, they are really not effective. And for those of us in the medical field that wear them, they're a little bit different than your regular mask. Your surgical mask breathes a little bit easier. But you actually, when you start an N95, we fit them. So you go in and are fitted for the mask. It's something all the healthcare facilities do. So that's what happens. And as Desi was saying, they give instructions that actually many of us that are in a facility had to be fitted for the mask and they had to be taught how to wear them. So my other concern is the ineffectiveness of the mask, because if the employees don't wear them right, and you see people like this with the mask not even over their nose, it's not effective. And I concur with Desi, unless the whole community is doing it, it would not be very effective. Any other discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Strand?
Yes.
Preston?
No.
Gehrig?
No.
Pepcorn?
No.
Mahoney?
No. Any other discussion? Mr. Strand?
Bear with me, Mayor. Desi, getting back to how Grand Forks is doing it, and Mayor, can we explore the ability to step up the access to the public of these higher quality masks, knowing that cloth doesn't work? If they're giving, I'd be just, curious, if they got it through CARES funding in Grand Forks, if the public wants them, you don't have to get one, Commissioner Pepcorn, but somebody else may want one. Can we consider doing that here?
Desi, can you answer that? Do you have capacity?
Well, yeah, I think we can. I would agree with the mayor on the N95s. I mean, this is a situation where they don't necessarily have to be fit tested because you're trying to prevent this highly contagious variant. But I will say that a KN95 is much more palatable. That's what I wear when I'm in public. It just you're able to breathe just a little bit better with that. So if we did anything, I would probably suggest more along that lines. The other challenge with that is we've been trying to get the KN95s in for our shelter staff, and they're a little bit tricky on, just supply chain is causing issues. So I don't know that we could successfully have them right away. We maybe could after like a week or so, we could be offering those if we would need to the public.
And I think Commissioner Strand, she could pursue that and have that available to public. I don't know that it takes a motion to do that, but we do have some COVID money, I think, available to handle that cost. Is that right, Desi? Do we have some money for masks?
Well, we have our local public health funds that pays for our testing and things. I'm not sure if the city and county have extinguished all of their CARES funds or not, but we certainly could explore where that may come from.
We'll take this offline and discuss it if that's consistent. Okay. Any other discussion? Thank you, Desi. We're going to go back to public opportunities, public input opportunity. We have first item 13A is a continue to 1/4/24/22, the application of alcoholic beverage license. Do I have a motion?
I move to continue.
Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call vote.
Pepcorn?
Aye.
Gehrig?
Yes.
Preston?
Aye.
Strand?
Yes.
Mahoney?
Aye. Item 13B, Urban Plains by Brandt, second edition. Approval recommended by Planning Commission on 12/7/21. A zoning change from a limited commercial conditional overlay to a multi-dwelling residential with conditional overlay in the first reading of the rezoning ordinance. Donald Kress to explain.
Good evening, Commissioners. Donald Kress of the Department of Planning and Development. This item includes an ordinance prepared by the City Attorney's Office, which is included in your packet. Item 13B, as the mayor has stated, is Urban Plains by Brant, second edition. This is located, here's the 32nd Avenue South. Shields Arena is located in this undeveloped property just north of Shields Arena here. This is 51st Street here in the Urban Plains area. These photos show the undeveloped site, obviously taken before today, but still an undeveloped site. See the green grass there. The property is currently zoned LC, limited commercial, with a conditional overlay. This is the applicant's preliminary site plan. The proposal is to, the applicant has identified the target market for this as an active living residence for ages 55 and over. The applicant is requesting a rezone to MR3 with a conditional overlay in order to construct this multi-dwelling residence. Staff recommends modifications to the existing conditional overlay to continue the concept of a more mixed-use building form originally intended for this Urban Plains area. Particularly, in order to fully accommodate the pedestrian amenities, parking abutting the public right-of-way on 51st is prohibited. And we'll just note here, Commissioners, that 51st is laid out a little differently than streets outside of downtown because it does have the diagonal parking. So one of the requirements of the conditional overlay is to not have any parking out in front of the building here, to only have the building set back the standard MR3 zone setback, which is 25 feet, and the placement of the detached parking garages would be limited, and here they're specified in the back area here. These items, as noted, are depicted on this preliminary plan. The applicant has also provided some renderings of the building, and here again we see that diagonal parking out in front. A couple of different views there, Shields Arena in the background, and looking across the park at it there too. In 2003, a master plan was created for the Urban Plains development. This plan was revised in 2013. Remaining consistent with both plans was the plan for mixed-use commercial with destination-oriented land uses surrounding the Shields Arena, which you see here, and here's our proposed project site here, with a focus on heavy pedestrian and regional park focus along 51st Street. So again, here's the park and our project site. The right-of-way included additional built amenities to create an environment to include widened walkways and on-street parking amenities unique to anywhere else in the southwest part of the city, as we looked at a moment ago. The parcel in this application is the last remaining parcel with the potential for implementing the vision of the original concept design of Urban Plains. As such, with this application, staff has requested an updated master plan, which we have here, for review in order to better understand the developer's updated vision of the remaining undeveloped properties. Noted in the plan is a housing mixed-use land use category for 51st Street. So here's the legend here, housing mixed use designated for that land use. Note that this plan is not being adopted as part of the zone change, but is helpful in understanding the broader context. The applicants, Austin Morris and Tim Gleason of Enclave Companies, are with us this evening and may wish to address the Commission. The Planning Commission's recommendation is stated in the staff report and shown on your screen. That concludes staff's presentations. Thank you, Commissioners.
Is there anyone present who wishes to speak to this new development?
I'll go through this relatively swiftly. Austin Morris with Enclave. I put together a presentation. I'm not sure if it's, there we go. So just to provide context, we've been master planning this for the last 6-7 years, and on Veterans Boulevard specifically, we wanted to concentrate the commercial, retail, and mixed use application with a walkable pedestrian pathway called Uptown Way. And thus far, we've accomplished that vision with this project, Caribou Coffee, Gunderson's Jewelers, Plaza Azteca, Mexican restaurant, and then Uptown and Main mixed-use property, which is now 88% occupied on the first floor and 98% occupied in the apartments. And then marching south, we have McAllister's, which took this location, and then this future project, which is Live, and that'll be 110 units above commercial. And then we'll continue paving the way forward for the future mixed use. And once we get to the most important focal point, it would be Veterans and 32nd. This project specifically, and here's some of the examples of the products that have been developed. Here's a snapshot of Live, which will come to us by spring of next year. And then I'll actually circle back to this slide. So the inspiration behind this piece is how do we activate the park amenity space? They just added pickleball courts. That park turned out beautiful over the past 3-4 years of a lot of hard work from the park district and city planning office. And we ordered a Maxfield study, which is a third-party group out of Minneapolis to determine site need. And the Maxfield study said our community needs roughly 800 units of 55 plus housing in a active environment, much different than what you'd see in a traditional continuum of care facility that would have the independent living, assisted living, acute, and skilled nursing. So this will only have 55 plus apartments with a robust amenity set to take advantage of the park-like setting, and then also the amenities that are naturally occurring with retail, restaurant, easy access to interchange, and then about a block away from healthcare. I'd be happy to answer any questions you guys have. Here's the overview of the sort of site plan makeup, and I'll pause on the rendering.
Austin, can you just go back to your first slide where you showed the first development? You started on the left. Keep going right there.
Yep.
So the first development on the left, when the Main Street Initiative author came to town, talked about how different areas were joining. And just for the commissioner's knowledge, that one on the left upper is a high square footage taxable area we have because it's a mixed use development with commercial as well. So that concept and model works very well as return on investment for the city.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Is there anybody else wish to speak to this development or this motion? I'm sorry. Any of the commissioners have any questions, Austin? We'll close the public hearing. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call vote.
Preston,
Aye.
Pepcorn,
Aye.
Garrick,
Yes.
Strand,
Yes.
Mahoney.
Yes.
Thank you, Commissioners.
We're welcoming back Eric Johnson, who recently retired, and he's going to talk to us about the first reading of the ordinance relating to ordinances procedure. Eric?
It's like it's like the mafia, Eric. We keep pulling you back.
I was telling him it's the first time I've ever had to do a interview for a demotion. I touched on this at the last meeting 2 weeks ago and thought it'd be appropriate to follow up with just a little bit more discussion. This is a very brief presentation. Again, 2 weeks ago, I walked through this in a little more detail, not much, but a little more detail, indicating that, again, in November, you approved direction that rather than ask for an advisory vote on whether or not to have term limits presented to the city electorate, to have an up or down vote. And that process is certainly authorized to do that, but we do need to enact a procedural ordinance. That's in front of you today. And the suggested action is simply to waive the actual first reading and move this on for 2 weeks later to have second reading and final adoption. That's step one, the procedural ordinance. Really, the purpose for my standing here tonight is to talk about step two. That won't happen until after the step one is finished, but since we just talked about it 2 weeks ago, I thought it might be appropriate to follow up now while it's somewhat fresh in mind. Step two is for you to approve a resolution. And that resolution sort of directs the city auditor to advertise in the newspaper, the forum, at least 60 days before the city election in June. June 14th is the next city election. That resolution would contain the actual ordinance that you're asking the voters to vote on. The example, I think, if you took no other action, the resolution I would intend to present to you would be an ordinance repealing our current term limits ordinance. So that's the next slide here. This is, of course, a truncated version of the ordinance, but really a repealing ordinance is very simple. It just says, therefore be it ordained by the city commission that that Section 20106 is hereby repealed in its entirety. That would be the language in the resolution you'd be presenting to the city voters to repeal the current term limits ordinance. Nothing wrong with that. It's all just fine. I just called attention to it 2 weeks ago to say it's can be a little bit counterintuitive. What I didn't present to you 2 weeks ago was sort of what might a sample ballot look like. I'm not saying this is what it would be, but I think it probably would be close to that. Typically, the city auditor, Mr. Sprague, puts this together. It's not required, but customarily he presents it to you. So you might ultimately be seeing something like this from Mr. Sprague in advance. But the ballot itself might say something like, shall an ordinance repealing the existing city law, Section 20106 of the Fargo Municipal Code, be approved, which law establishes term limits for the mayor and city commissioners. All is provided in the notice that's published in the form. And the key here is that what the voters are voting on is yes or no. Shall that ordinance be approved? Shall the ordinance repealing term limits be approved? That would be the sample ballot for repealing. I come to you tonight. I alluded to this in a colloquy with Commissioner Preston 2 weeks ago during the meeting, is what might something else look like that is less than counterintuitive. And I think really what that would mean would require, maybe there's some other ideas, but I think the basic idea would be if you wanted to, you could take action to actually repeal the term limits ordinance. Maybe it stays in effect until the time of the election. So there isn't a term limits ordinance in effect, at the time that they're voting. And then what they're voting would be to reenact term limits. So you're then asking them, as that bottom line says, city voters would then be asked whether they want to approve an ordinance that establishes term limits, yes or no. What's the value of that? Well, the value is just you're saying, I want term limits, then I'm voting yes. If I don't want them, I'm voting no. And so in some sense, the ballot would be a little more intuitive. I think either one is possible. But I just wanted to present that to you in a little bit more meaningful way than we covered 2 weeks ago. This is my concluding slide. Is there any action needed? Yes, I think you do need to take action on the procedural ordinance that's in front of you, again, waiving first reading. But relative to this dialogue, I'll call it the sort of ballot language problem, if you take no action, my intention would be to prepare that resolution for presentation to you in February, after the procedural ordinance has taken effect, unless you wanted to, give some direction to the city attorney's office to draft, to do two things really. One is to repeal the ordinance with a date a date that takes effect sometime in the future, where the repeal would take effect by the time the election occurs, and then the resolution that would reenact it. So if you take no action, I'll just move forward. Assuming we're going to be presenting a repealing ordinance to the city voters. But if you'd like something different, you're welcome to do so now or sometime in the future.
Discussion. Commissioner Gregg.
Eric, if we repealed that law before the vote, would that rehack everyone's clock then?
No, we'd draft some kind of savings clause in there that protects isn't probably the right word, that retains everyone's existing terms.
Yeah, and so I think that makes a lot of sense. It cleans up the language. If we repeal it, of course, we all have to agree on that before the election, right? But I think the language saying, do you want to enact a law creating term limits? I think that is much more intuitive to the voter to say yes or no on. At least that's from my perspective.
Commissioner Preston.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, I think the value with this is it would be clearer. And secondly, we would need to repeal a current ordinance either way, right? No matter how the public would actually vote on election day, we would have to repeal the current one. Is that correct?
I don't think it's required. I mean, obviously, we just had a fair amount of discussion in a court decision that lent some interpretation to the ordinance. I mean, it stands as it does with the clarity provided by the court, so it isn't required. But you certainly could take action to modify it.
The other thing that this one does, this approach, would allow us to perhaps clean up some of the language that was probably not as clear as it could have been. So a couple of advantages for doing it that way, it seems.
Commissioner Strand.
Thank you, Mayor. I still would prefer an advisory vote. If we're talking term limits, how many terms? How many years? Which configuration of mayors, commissioners? I mean, that's just all gray. If we're asking people to approve term limits, we haven't defined them beyond what they're currently defined as. So in my head, I'd rather have a sense from the general public. Do you want term limits or not? And if they don't, then we honor their advice to us. Otherwise, I just don't know how we get the wording proactively to the point where it's clear. I mean, you look at other jurisdictions, there's just all kinds of term limits, all kinds of terms, all kinds of configurations, all kinds of lengths, all kinds of criteria. I just can't fathom going to the public and asking them to vote on something that's that hazy.
I'd say the present ordinance, John, is a little confusing though, because we had commissioners who thought it was one way, we had attorneys tell us a different way. So our present ordinance has some confusion, just like Commissioner Preston says. We'd have to clean that up anyway. I think you may have new commissioners on after June, and there'd be opportunity, or the commissioners that are here, opportunity to discuss what they want. You'd repeal the one, and then you could design the one with public input. I don't know how many terms they want or not want or whatever, but you don't have a clearly defined ordinance unless you suggest an ordinance out there of new defined term limits. Because your point advisory vote, you still don't know what you're having. What Eric has suggested just says, I do want term limits, I don't. Commission, you decide after you get this vote.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Preston.
So let me clarify, and Eric, correct me if I'm wrong. So the second option, there would be an ordinance with all of that defined, and that's what people would be voting on. It wouldn't be a wide open, do you want term limits? No, it would be reacting to a specific ordinance. Is that correct?
Yeah, that would be, yes, you'd have to have an ordinance that they're going to vote
Right,
upon. And yes,
right.
it would have to say something. It could be identical to the current one, or you could
Eric,
modify it. You'll have to decide what that's going to
Can you go
look like.
back in your slides?
I think I can.
Back. So, no, you had one more slide that I had fairly simple. This was a sample ballot. No, not that one. No, it says term limits, no term limits, basically.
I don't have too many slides on this.
Yep, there you what you just had it.
Okay.
Next.
Up.
Next. There. No, that's not the one I thought. Do you have one that just had the vote, do you believe in term limits or don't?
No, I don't think I have a slide to that effect. That would have been the advisory vote.
That John's talking about?
Yeah.
Just so I understand what you're trying to talk about, if we repeal the present ordinance, if we did that, then the vote in June would be what?
Then it would be to sort of reenact term limits, a term limits proposed ordinance. You would be approving the proposed ordinance, and the city electorate would be voting on a precise.
So you would
ordinance.
actually present, we would design a new ordinance
Yep.
before the election?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. But, bear in mind, that might involve a fair amount of discussion. To your point,
Mr.
Mayor.
Garrick,
And that's the opportunity for the public to weigh in. So as we draft that new ordinance,
Yep.
you and I will all be contacted by whoever's interested in this and told, hey, if you have term limits, this is how I'd like them to look. So just like anything else we vote on ordinances every meeting, almost. And if people have opportunity to weigh in, that's how they do. They contact us. We don't have a board for every meeting, for every law that we enact. So again, if we repeal this current law and give the people an option for the new law, they have an opportunity to vote for that language. If they don't want term limits, they vote no to enact it, and then we don't term limits. So this is a true way to get the opinion of the people on what they think of our current way of doing it versus getting rid of it again.
the only difficulty I would see with Commissioner Garrick is we may have 4 commissioners presently sitting that are in an election race. So I think it's difficult if they're in the middle of an election to decide on the term limit issue. I would think we may all be conflicted, and it might be just John that gets to vote on it. Because,
I'd be okay with that.
yeah. So I just point of technicality that we need to think about.
Mr. Chairman, if I
Mr.
could
Preston.
respond to that a little bit. The thing is that this new ordinance, if it would be approved by the public, would not go into effect until the election is pretty much done. So I don't see any kind of conflict of interest necessarily, but it brings clarity to the question on the ballot, and I think that's the most important thing here, it seems to me. Otherwise, we're not going to be real clear. I mean, if people are confused when they go and vote on this thing, we're not going to be real clear what they're saying. That's why I would like.
Mr. Garrett.
And ultimately, we already voted as a commission to put this on the ballot. So that has to happen. So we can either do it this way or we can do it the other way, but it has to happen in some capacity. We already made that vote as a city commission. You can't just not do it. That would be going against what we voted on. So you can have your disdain for either way to do it, but it does need to happen. So pick the best way that you think it is, and let's move forward.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr.
if I could
Preston.
make one more comment. So, to make things less confusing, we could direct Eric to produce language that basically uses the same framework that we currently have. So it would be the same term limits, the same requirements about consecutive, except defining things better. So instead of opening this up real wide, it could be just basically taking the current ordinance, cleaning up a couple of pieces that are a little bit confusing, and then putting basically, and I call it a whole hog amendment, but I think you called it a hog house amendment, where you're taking one ordinance and substituting it for the other. So, and to clarify this process, because I got confused with the last meeting, I was reacting to this conversation. I'll put a motion on the table to do the suggested action on the procedural ordinance. Let's get that behind us.
Second.
So is what's on here now, is that what it is?
Yeah, I think the motion is just to act on the procedural ordinances in front of you. I took it from the Commissioner Preston that there might be another motion to follow, but.
Right.
Was there a second? Gary, any other discussion? So the gist of this is we're going to repeal the present ordinance?
No, this one's just the procedural.
Okay.
Just that.
Any other discussion? Roll call vote.
Preston?
Aye.
Garrick?
Yes.
Pepcorn?
Aye.
Strand?
Yes.
Mahoney?
Yes.
Then, Mr. Chairman, I'd make a second motion that we direct Eric, you're no longer city attorney, I guess, to develop ordinance of repeal, and then also an ordinance that would be basically put on the ballot using the same framework that our current ordinance has, but cleaning up some of the confusing language.
Is there a second?
Second, but I have a comment.
Comment?
We don't need an ordinance to repeal the current.
Yeah, you will. You'll need, the notion is if you want them to enact a term limits ordinance, there are a couple of ways you could do it, but what we've been talking about is repealing the existing ordinance. It doesn't take effect until, the election time, and then have a resolution which contains a new ordinance.
Sure, I understand that part, but we could just vote as a simple majority right now to do that. We wouldn't.
Yes, that's her motion.
Yeah.
Her motion is to do just what I said.
Okay, thanks.
Any other discussion, questions? Roll call vote.
Preston?
Aye.
Garrick?
Yes.
Pepcorn?
Aye.
Strand?
No.
Mahoney?
Aye. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Moving on, update of the Cass County Election Service for the June 2022 city election. Basically, there's some timeframes here in which this county has to come forth and tell us what they're going to be doing. Mike Redinger will take us through it, and there is a part of our budget was $35,000 is in the budget to help get more voters out. So I think Robert Wilson and Mike Redinger are going to explain this.
Yes, I'd be happy to. Good evening, Commissioners. A briefing tonight on preparations for the city election on June 14th. of 2022. No action is requested of the commission this evening. I just want to highlight a couple of things on the city website. The elections tab on the city website now contains all of the information for candidates, as well as those who are interested in learning more about the timeline and the process. Staff now on the city side is working to implement the Cass County Election Administration Services Joint Powers Agreement. This was approved on the commission's consent agenda on December 27th. So following that approval on the 27th of December, we met on January 4 internally to talk about the implementation of the GAPA and what that means. We just want to highlight the great partnership that we do have with the city of Fargo and Cass County. The Cass County Auditor's Office has been a great asset to us, and we're really looking forward to working with them again this year on the city election for June 2022. I also just wanted to highlight before introducing Robert and Brandy that we did take a look at the previous action of the city commission. This was back in June of 2021. We did include, as the mayor noted, funds in the 2022 budget to allow for the mailing of absentee ballot applications. So our next step on the city staff side is to really work to develop communication material, as well as the printing, the actual printing of the absentee ballot application with our communications team, and getting that out at the time that's appropriate. You'll also have been provided some information from Cass County. They will talk about that right now, just about some of their preparations that they're talking about internally as it relates to the vote centers and really quite a number of in-person voting centers that will be available for this joint election coming up in June. So again, I just want to acknowledge our partnership with the county, thank them for their efforts, and just also want you to know that our city auditor, Steve Sprague, is here, Kent Costin, Finance Director, if there are any questions for the city. But with that, introduce Robert Wilson, the County Administrator. And Brandy Madriga is here. She is the Finance Director for Cass County. Thank you.
Mayor Mahoney, members of the board, good evening, and thank you for having us here. Happy to answer any questions that you may have about the process. I would echo Mr. Redlinger's comments. It's a pleasure to work with the city in this endeavor, and appreciate the effort that went into drafting this agreement. And I think you have our material that's kind of lays out the vote center process and what we would be looking forward to in our elections procedures moving forward. And with that, I would stand by for any questions, and would also introduce our Finance Director, Brandy Madriga, who oversees the office that conducts and administers the elections, who would be able to really speak to any detailed questions that you may have.
Just what I'd like to talk a little bit about is the county has spent a considerable amount of money on this, and you're doing voting centers, which we've not had, or we've kind of had, but we're really going to go on steroids on it this time. So either one of you, if you want to just explain the investment that the county has, or if we had any interest in getting into election process, how you're working with all the municipalities in the area. They're all signing up with an agreement with the county, which in the past we really didn't have, but it redefines responsibilities and costs together and doesn't put it just all on the auditor to kind of decide what's happening. I think it's we signed a contract with you now that's modified and what we can get or what we need to do or what we may pay for different elements. But just, I know you and I know your commissioners as well have weighed into, you think you have the best way right now to get votes out, that it'll be easy for people to vote. They have a lot of time to vote, so it's not all dependent on one day. I think you're going to have some voting centers open throughout the county. But just if you could explain that a little bit, Robert, that would help, or Brandy, whichever one.
Mayor Mahoney, members of the board, again, I'll make thank you very much. I'll make a few comments and turn it over to Brandy for additional comments. But you are correct that there was really a statewide investment in the equipment required for vote centers, and so that was rolled out first election with the vote centers was November 2020, and I think largely successful. The concept of vote centers, obviously, that you no longer have to vote in a home precinct. You can vote in any of the vote centers across the county. Our feedback was that residents, that citizens felt like that gave them greater flexibility and ability to vote as it was most convenient, and we intend to do that again moving forward with lessons learned from 2020. And I would turn it over to Ms. Madriga with any additional comments you might want to make on that.
Sure. Thank you, Robert. Members of the board, I'm not sure if there's much more I can add. Robert was really good on that one. Yeah, so the purpose of the Joint Powers Agreement was really just to formalize our relationship. No major changes expected. It was really just so everybody knows what to expect. As far as the vote centers, it was really well received. We were able to open it up to early voting, so residents have the ability to go to a certain select number of vote centers the week before the election to be able to cast their votes without the long lineups, and that was good. However, we did notice that election day is still a very busy day. A lot of people do want to submit their votes on election day, so we have at the moment we have budgeted for about 10 vote centers. We're going to go through and formalize how many we are actually going to open up, but we do expect to have voting centers opened up to meet everybody's needs.
Commissioners, do you have any questions? Commissioner Strand.
Thank you. So I'm clear, this approach still incorporates the city's desire to allow mail-in voting? Am I clear? Is that correct? It is, I think, but just making sure.
So as far as absentee applications being sent out, groups do that every year, and we would still process absentee ballots and the applications in the same manners as we have before. It is a manual process, and as we see absentee ballots increase, there are increased costs that we're budgeting for and preparing for.
Again, just so I'm clear, this proposal still accommodates the city's budgeted and approved approach that allows mail-out applications prior to the election. Am I correct on that? Because that's what we approved.
Mike, do you want to explain that to her? Maybe she doesn't understand.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Strand, for the question. You are correct. So what the county will be proposing to do with the in-person voting will be the in-person option with a number of sites yet to be determined. The city, in its 22 approved budget, will also then fund the activity of the mailed ballot applications. So those are separate activities, but yet related. We want to provide as many opportunities as possible for the electorate to participate in the process. And I should also note, too, that in our January 4 discussion, and I included this in my cover communication, there will not be additional cost attributed to the city for processing those absentee ballot applications at Cass County. In that regard, as I noted in my communication, the city will act almost as if it was an interest group, a political party, or another entity that's mailing out ballot applications. They will process those applications, and we appreciate that. That's a real gracious offer. We weren't sure if that was going to be the case or not. So the funds that are contained in the budget truly are for the printing costs, the postage costs, and getting us up on the city website to get the word out about the opportunities to vote in person, as well as with this mailed process.
And the question, John, was whether the cost was not just the $35,000. It was rumored with on pleasure that the cost for the county may be $100,000 or $120,000, and was the city going to cover that extra cost? And what they've negotiated, this is a pilot. They're going to see if it gets more votes out, see what happens to it. There's no increased charge, so they're going to utilize the money that was put in the budget. Commissioner Gary.
To be clear, we're automatically sending out these requests?
Correct. The commission action from back in June, the funds that were contained were based on an estimate prepared at that time by Commissioner Preston. And so that was based on an estimate of a number of mailed pieces and postage costs.
So I'd like to see where in the budget that was, because my recollection was we didn't fund that portion of it. So I'd like to see that.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I could make a comment.
Sure, Preston.
I just want to commend the county for formalizing this whole process and clarifying all the different pieces in it. The JPA, I think, is probably one of the better pieces that came out of this conversation, so thank you for doing that. I also just want to make a statement that if nothing else, we are talking about voter turnout and how to accommodate the voters, which I think has a lot of value when we're talking about city elections with such low turnout. So I'm glad that happened.
Any other discussion? There's no action required, Mike. This
That
is
is
just
correct.
information, right? Thank you very much. Welcome
you.
aboard.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you have my appointments, recommendations for the Historic Preservation Commission? Can I have a motion?
So moved.
Second. All those, roll call vote?
Preston?
Aye.
Garrick?
Yes.
Pepcorn?
Aye.
Strand?
Yes.
Mahoney?
Aye. Applications for property tax exemption for improvements made to buildings. You have a list. Do I have a motion?
I so move.
Any discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Pepcorn?
Aye.
Garrick?
Yes.
Preston?
Aye.
Strand?
Yes.
Mahoney?
Aye. Any other business? We're adjourned half hour later than we thought, but thank you.
Not bad, though.